I cover China fairly often as it's become one of the top enemies of U.S. hegemony. The U.S. empire goes after China regularly. And of course, China is one of the main reasons that BRICS has formed, that we're seeing the rift in the global economic hegemony, that we're seeing many African nations able to stand up and fight back against the post-colonial world. And China's hugely important. So a lot of people are wondering, what kind of political system do they have in China? It's, partially communist, it's partially capitalist. Is there any democracy in China? But here's the article written by Simon Turner. It says, U.S. or China, which is truly democratic? American oligarchy versus Chinese consultative democracy. Most of you don't need to be really reminded that the U.S. has oligarchy. We have ruled by a tiny business elite. We don't really have democracy almost at all. We have it maybe on the state level to some degree, on city level. But if you're talking federally, the elections are all clearly and obviously bought. And the most important thing to know is that in very large studies, nothing gets through Congress. Nothing is passed through Congress that doesn't align with corporate interests, meaning the system is owned. The system has been captured at the federal level. So compare that to what China has. From the article, it says a Western survey, the Edelman Trust Barometer, found China to be the country rated highest globally in terms of people's trust in their government. China has in fact held the top spot every year, but once since 2018, with a comprehensive trust index of 79 in 2024. The U.S. is down at a mere 46. Well, I don't think they're rating every country, and I don't think they're putting Nehru on here or anything. So what number, what it ranks wouldn't really matter. The point is, the U.S. is much farther down. I mean, we're below Spain, Ireland, France, Colombia, Sweden. The people of the U.S. are at a disadvantage, however, the article says. How can their trust in government be strong under a duopoly system that is most convincing when the population is most polarized? That the governments in such a system based on divide and conquer cannot reach China's approval rating is practically built in. And that's a great point. It's like, the ruling elite, in order to continue to own our system, in order to continue to have a stranglehold on our system, they need us very divided. They need us not working with each other. And in order to do that, they have the duopoly, and they say, oh, it's red or blue team. That's all you can talk about. That's it. You got to pick your team and go with it. You got to hate the other side. If anyone's on the other side, they are dead to you. And so when you do that, you have half the country or close to it that is going to inevitably hate whichever president's in office because that president's from the other team. For the ruling elite, it's a great show. It's great theatrics. In China, the elites and organized groups representing business interests are kept below, subordinated by the government. And this is a key difference, is the business elites do not run the country in China. The business elites may have some types of power, but it's not running the government. Whereas in the U.S., the business elites, big oil, big ag, big pharma, they run the government. Nothing is done outside of their interests. What Western critics call an authoritarian system, they call China authoritarian, right? And there's that great clip not that long ago of Biden in front of giving a speech, and he's asked whether President Xi is in China is a dictator, and he goes, yeah, he's a dictator. And you just see Anthony Blinken in the front row, wincing, like he just been, poop was just thrown in his face. Because he knows that despite the Cold War that the U.S. has created with China, the U.S. still wants to work with China on various things. We have a lot of corporations in China. Starbucks, China's their second biggest market. Apple, China's their second biggest market. So you have these massive U.S. companies that still very much need China. So that's why Blinken was wincing as Biden said, oh, yeah, it's a dictator. Critics call an authoritarian system is actually a different form of democracy, run not on behalf of a wealthy minority, but rather in the interests of a great majority. Although China's former leader, Deng Xiaoping, did allow market forces into the country, starting with the reform and opening in 1978, he insisted that the state would control the markets. Deng said of markets, if they serve socialism, they are socialist. If they serve capitalism, they are capitalist. In the United States, however, politicians don't listen to the people. And why would they? How can the system be a representative democracy when a candidate can't win an election without a great deal of money? And that money generally has to come from some of the richest people in the country. And in the rare case that someone gets into Congress without the money coming from the richest people in the country, and there's a few select examples like Dennis Kucinich or Cynthia McKinney, or then they are quickly drummed out. They are quickly booted out. Cory Bush, and I don't know how much of Jamal Bowman's money came from wealthy elites, but I do not think Cory Bush, much of her money did. And now they've both been beaten by the money. U.S. politicians know whom they need to please. As the academic study on U.S. oligarchy showed, in Washington's so-called representative democracy, the only ones truly represented are big business. So China has something called a Message Board for Leaders, MLB platform, that connects the general population to local and ministry-level government officials. It launched in 2006, and it handled 2.3 million demands, concerns, and complaints. Another nationwide Chinese government initiative, the 12345 hotline, fields more than 50,000 contacts a day in Beijing via telephone, internet, and new media, addressing issues of everyday life. Over 85% of concerns are resolved. When I first heard this, if you put it in an American filter, like if someone told me, hey, the city or the state is creating a 123 hotline where they'll help you with things, I would go, oh, I'm sure that'll be bullshit. I'm sure there's like ignored it all. I mean, to give an example, just a standard example, Maryland, where I now live, I live in Baltimore, Maryland deducted my Maryland taxes twice from my bank account. They just stole the money twice. And I've been trying to contact them to get the money back, to get the second charge back. No one ever answers a phone. Emails are never returned. Zero response. So if someone were to tell me in the American filter, like if you put this in an American mindset that the government created a hotline to help you, I'd go, yeah, that doesn't mean anything. They're not doing it. They're not going to do anything with it. They're going to say, hey, we have a hotline that we never listened to. We play some great hold music there. I don't know. It's John Mayer all day long on the hold music. By the way, that's one of my pet peeves. If I could just go off a quick tangent, is the hold music is meant to get you to hang up. Does everyone understand that? The hold music, it is designed to make you hang up. Do you get that? It's designed to make you hang up. But if you instead put this in a filter of a different government, and instead you put this in a world where the government is somewhat accountable to the people, then in this case, of the 50,000 contacts a day, 85% of concerns are resolved. The U.S. wouldn't get anywhere near that. China has also created local legislative liaison stations where grassroots deputies discuss legislative drafts and collect suggestions from the public. There are 45 national and 6,500 provincial and municipal through trains that connect ordinary people to China's highest legislative office, the Standing Committee of the National People's Congress. Local legislative liaison stations serve as contact points and collection centers for public opinion on draft national legislation. From the launch of the offices in 2015 to 2023, there were 3,100 ideas on forming or revising national legislation were incorporated. Soon after he became the new president of China in 2013, Xi Jinping launched a crackdown on corruption. Of course, if you read U.S. articles about the crackdown on corruption, they call it a consolidating of his power. But, perhaps there's another way to look at it than the U.S. propaganda way. What? How could that be? Launched a crackdown on corruption. In this mass line campaign referred to as the thorough cleanup, they sought to address long-standing problems in the country, targeting the four forms of decadence: formalism, bureaucratism, hedonism, and extravagance. At a study session of provincial and ministerial level officials in 2022, Xi reprised the theme, saying all party members should always maintain close ties with the people and accept the criticism and oversight of the people. And those were no empty words. The anti-corruption campaign was very serious. Many people, including the vice mayor of the Shanxi province, were given a life sentence in prison for accepting 1 billion yuan, $160 million in bribes. Now, I'm opposed to a life sentence for, I think, anything, but better to go after corruption than not. In the U.S., we don't. In the U.S., we don't call them bribes. We just call them campaign contributions. It's not a bribe, it's a contribution. And the Supreme Court just decided that it's actually fine to bribe people, to bribe politicians, as long as you give the money to them afterwards. As long as you don't show up with the unmarked bag before they do the favor, before they hire your nephew for the construction job or whatever, before they do the thing, as long as you show up afterwards with the unmarked bag and you go, here's a reward for being awesome. As long as you do that, basically, the Supreme Court said, totally fine. As long as you bribe afterwards. It is almost impossible to imagine senior executives of large U.S. banks on Wall Street being arrested for corruption. In fact, they crashed the economy in 2008 only to be bailed out by the government. The government basically gave them $1 trillion for collapsing the economy. Instead, as the watchdog website Wall Street on Parade wrote, despite 5 felony counts, JP Morgan Chase CEO Jamie Dimon is allowed to remain at the helm of his federally insured bank despite his presiding over one of the worst banking scandals in U.S. history. 5 felony counts. They negotiated directly with Jamie Dimon because that's what they do. In the rare case that they go after someone like Jamie Dimon, they just negotiate with them and here's how we'll do it. They gave complete civil immunity to JP Morgan Chase. So they gave him complete immunity for defrauding thousands in exchange for $13 billion via a contract that was negotiated, finalized in secret without any review or approval by a federal court. Complete immunity. That's what they do with the rich. In 2023, the United States saw the second biggest banking collapse in its history as First Republic Bank crashed. Can you guess which bank was entrusted with more than $200 billion in First Republic assets and realized an almost $3 billion profit on the deal? JP Morgan Chase. When debating the state of U.S. democracy, one cannot forget the brutal violence of the U.S. state. In the U.S., police have killed more than 1,000 North Americans annually for the last decade, with 1,247 victims in 2023. And as you've heard me mention many times, it's actually over double that. The Lancet Medical Journal showed that after reviewing thousands of deaths across the U.S. across many years, it is an undercount of about 55%. And so it's actually close to double that number of victims every year. So more like 2,400 people are murdered by our police every year. How many are murdered in China? Essentially none. This doesn't mean there aren't police in China. It doesn't mean that there isn't some forms of censorship in China. The U.S. has censorship as well. The perhaps most famous dissident of China in the world, maybe, Weiwei, the artist, a well-known Chinese dissident, he has said, and I covered it several months ago, that the U.S. has more censorship than China, or I don't know, his words might have been worse censorship, because they pretend they don't. They pretend you can say anything while I'm suppressed and my YouTube channel's deleted and all that shit. So in the West, they act like, oh, we have all this freedom of speech and everything. Meanwhile, Scott Ritter's house is raided and everything. Every 6.6 hours in 2023, there was a police killing in the United States. So I guess since it's double the number he said earlier, it's actually every 3.3 hours there's a killing by police. In China, there were none at all and haven't been in years. The profound difference between China and the U.S. on the role of money in politics and how it skews democracy is stark. China does have elections, and for genuine representation, no lobbying or canvassing is allowed. Deputies to people's congresses at the township and county levels are elected by the Chinese people. These representatives, the deputies closest to the public, make up 94% of the national total and are entrusted with electing the higher level representatives. The truth about Chinese socialism as opposed to U.S. imperialism is that China's priority is domestic policy. Its focus is on its people, as epitomized by the mass line policy. From people to the people, democracy is fundamental. Whereas the U.S. has, outside of, local areas, has, and to some degree state, has essentially zero democracy. George Galloway described it when I saw him speak, and it wasn't his quote, so he's not the first to say it. In the U.S., you can vote to change the parties at the top of the ticket, but you can't actually vote to change any policies. The American people have no impact on policies. You just vote to change this party or that party. In China, you can't vote to change the party, but you can vote to change the policies. So you can actually have an impact on people's lives. Whereas in the US, we essentially can't. And the stuff that is given to us, even the largest example of stuff that changed for the American people, is still a giveaway and in coordination with corporate America. One of the largest things that has changed for American people would be Obamacare, the Obamacare shift. But as many of you know, that was initially a Republican idea, and it was agreed upon by all of the big health insurance companies because it put millions upon millions of healthy young people paying in to the system. And so it actually was a giant giveaway to health insurance companies. In the instances where you go, wow, they really did something for the American people, it's still a massive giveaway to corporate America. It is still anti-worker, anti-American, like your average American. Like the only people that can afford this society anymore are multi-millionaires. It's just utterly insane. Meanwhile, China, I hope some of you know this, over the past 30 years has taken 850 million people out of poverty. 850 million. Over 2 United States worths of people have been taken, almost 3 United States worth of people have been taken out of poverty by China, out of extreme poverty. Meanwhile, the U.S. is just increasing our poverty.